Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. As you know, we are discussing this week books on the theme of the meaning of life. And I've got a really short and interesting book for you today. It's called A Confession and it was written by Leo Tolstoy. As I said, it's very short, hardly 50 to 60 pages long. But in this book, Tolstoy raises all the important questions when it comes to the meaning of life. What's the point of life? Why should one live? Why don't we just kill ourselves? All the important fundamental questions that come to mind when you think of the meaning of life, they have been raised. It just feels like a memoir of sort where the narrator is recounting his life experiences from childhood till middle age and beyond. And the important point in the book comes when he's dealing with his existential crisis. And then he goes on to explore spirituality, religion, philosophy. And then finally, in a very symbolic or abstract way, he gives some answers, not many, but some kind of answers you get there. So what I'm going to do is, this is going to be a two-part series. In the first part, I'm going to be discussing what eventually leads to his existential crisis and the core philosophy that he explores and what he discovers. That we'll discover in the second part, in the next episode. So without any delay, let me take you to the narrative of the book. The book starts from the childhood of the narrator. And the first few lines goes as this. It says, "I was baptized and brought up in the Orthodox Christian faith. I was taught it in childhood and throughout my boyhood and youth. But when I abandoned the second course of the university at the age of 18, I no longer believed any of the things I had been taught." So right away, he jumps to the main point of the book, which is his struggle with the faith. He was baptized and he was brought up in the Orthodox Christian faith. But in his teen years, as he abandoned the course of the university when he was 18, he no longer believed in any of it, in any of the religious teachings that he was taught. And he also explains what really led to this lack of faith or lack of belief in religion. He says that in the educated people, even though the pretense has been, especially in those times, that they were religious, they don't really believe in it. And if anyone around them tries to be religious, tries to be very sincere towards religion, they kind of make fun of that person. And that discourages a young person who is pursuing the path of religion. And he recounts a story of a friend who told him how he ceased to believe. He says that on a hunting expedition when he was already 26, he once, at the place where they put up for the night, knelt down in the evening to pray, a habit retained from childhood. His elder brother, who was at the hunt with him, was lying on some hay and watching him. When he had finished and was settling down for the night, his brother said to him, "So you still do that?" Those are the kind of things that happen with people, with young people especially, that even though in childhood they are told to believe, but as soon as they grow up and they're still continuing those religious rituals, or they are very passionate about it, they are religiously following these teachings, they're kind of looked at and people make fun of it. It's not very encouraging if somebody wants to pursue the path of faith. So he abandoned his faith, but he at the same time he admits that we all have some kind of inherent faith in us. And even though on the surface we kind of get rid of our faiths, our belief systems, but inside we have certain faith. In his case, he says he had this faith of trying to perfect himself. That is, he's just trying, he was, when he was young, he was trying to get better at certain things. He was trying to improve himself. And that was his faith. So eventually, all the things he's describing in the book, he's relating those things with belief and faith. He says that this was his faith, that he was trying to perfect himself. So that sounds a lot like religious faith in the traditional sense, that there is an ideal and you're trying to get close to it. The ideal in religion's case is God, and you're trying to get close to that. But even if you are not a religious person, you're still doing it. You're still trying to uh, get close to the perfection, no matter what work you're doing. So there is an ideal there in your work, in whichever task you're doing, and you're trying to get close to it. That itself is faith. Anyway, so then he enters his youth, and he says that he did a lot of things during his youth. He killed men in war because he participated in war. He was a part of the military, and he lived a life of pleasures. He roved, he committed adultery, he drank, he committed violence, murders. So all the materialistic things that you could think of, he did all of that. And he lived that way during his youth for the next 10 years. And then he begins to write. He becomes a writer, and rather a popular one. And he gets into the company of writers and artists who, according to him, it says that they were thinking in their heads that they were some kind of superior beings, and their purpose was to educate the masses, the peasants, people who did not have the wisdom that they had. Now, he says that this was their faith. This was the faith of the intellectuals, that they were somehow superior, and they were supposed to teach or preach. So, in a way, this was their faith, and they stayed committed to it. But he also saw a problem in that. One of the major problem was, even though these artists, these intellectuals, they were trying to preach other people, they themselves didn't know much. They didn't know what to teach. And at the same time, they contradicted each other. So there was not one truth in this case. It was just everybody putting forward their views, and because there was some money involved when they published their books, they kept churning out a lot of books, and in the end it was all meaningless. But it still continued. They kept appreciating each other, sometimes critiquing each other, but the business of writing went on, the business of these intellectuals and artists, it went on. Then he says that he travels to Europe, and he notices another kind of faith there. Faith not in, again, in the traditional sense, but these Europeans, they had a faith in progress. And if anyone asked them what was going on, and they said they were progressing, once again towards what? They didn't know. They were just obsessed with this faith of progress. And they kept convincing themselves that they were progressing. But progressing towards what? What was the ideal there? They didn't know. And once again, it disappointed him. And so he comes back, and A few things happen during that time when he comes back. One, he gets married, he has children, he gets busy in raising his children. At the same time, he spends some time with ordinary folks, teaching the kids of ordinary peasants. That also gives him life experience, brings him close to people. And at the same time, he loses his brother. So that also, you can see that's the beginning of some kind of existential crisis, because he starts questioning life and death more seriously when death strikes in his family. And then in the middle age, he says that crisis happened. Let me narrate from the book how he describes it. He says, "So I lived, but 5 years ago, something very strange began to happen to me. At first, I experienced moments of perplexity and arrest of life, as though I did not know what to do or how to live. And I felt almost lost and became dejected. But this passed, and I went on living as before. Then these moments of perplexity began to recur oftener and always in the same form. They were always expressed by the questions, what is it for? What does it lead to?" In other words, what's the point of life? And when those questions keep coming back to him, that's where his real crisis begins. Once again, let me read from the book how he describes his situation. He says that my life came to a standstill. I could breathe, eat, drink, and sleep, and I could not help doing these things. But there was no life, for there were no wishes, the fulfillment of which I could consider reasonable. If I desired anything, I knew in advance that whether I satisfied my desire or not, nothing would come out of it. Had a fairy come and offered to fulfill my desires, I should not have known what to ask. If in moments of intoxication I felt something which, though not a wish, was a habit left by former wishes, in sober moments I knew this to be a delusion and that there was really nothing to wish for. I could not even wish to know the truth, for I guessed of what it consisted. The truth was that life is meaningless. I had, as it were, lived, and walked, till I had come to precipice and saw clearly that there was nothing ahead of me but destruction. It was impossible to stop, impossible to go back, and impossible to close my eyes or avoid seeing that there was nothing ahead but suffering and real death, complete annihilation. And you can see the despair in him. And he says at one point that he really wanted to kill himself, but he just couldn't. He doesn't understand why, but he just couldn't kill himself. And he explains his situation by this Eastern fable, and it's quite interesting. I'm sure you're going to like it and you're going to relate with it. It kind of describes the human condition. So there was a traveler. He was overtaken on a plain by an enraged beast. Escaping from the beast, he gets into a dry well, but sees at the bottom of the well a dragon that has opened its jaws to swallow him. And the unfortunate man, not daring to climb out, lest he should be destroyed by the enraged beast, and not daring to leap to the bottom of the well, lest he should be eaten by the dragon, seizes a twig growing in a crack in the well and clings to it. His hands are growing weaker, and he feels he will soon have to resign himself to the destruction that awaits him above or below, but still he clings on. Then he sees that Two mice, a black and a white one, go regularly round and round the stem of the twig to which he is clinging and gnaw at it. And soon the twig itself will snap and he will fall into the dragon's jaws. The traveler sees this and knows that he will inevitably perish. But while still hanging, he looks around, sees some drops of honey on the leaves of the twig, reaches them with his tongue, and licks them. And he says, "This is how I clung to life. This is how many of us, in fact, I would say all of us, cling to life. There is no escape. There is no escape from death. There is no escape from suffering. And yet, in the middle of it, we get tempted by the pleasures that are on offer, and we ignore the more serious questions of existentialism. So he was still going through all this crisis and he was looking for answers. He says then he takes refuge of science. And there are two kinds of science. He says one is the experimental science, the other is abstract sciences. In experimental sciences, he says they don't even recognize this problem, the question of why. Experimental sciences, they measure the atoms, they measure the flow of the universe, all the things, how they work, but not the why. The question of why is kind of nonsense for them. So they don't answer this question at all. The mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, they don't answer why. And then there are these abstract sciences, much of which is a part of philosophy today. There, the question of meaning arises, but all the philosophers, they have led to this conclusion, and in those philosophers, he also includes the ancient Greek philosophers or the ancient Indian Buddhist philosophers, and he says that they also didn't find any meaning in life. They said that life was suffering. They did not show any hope. In fact, they also showed a lot of despair, because essentially they saw life as suffering and nothing more. And he quotes all these philosophers. Let me read it from the book. So Socrates says, the life of the body is an evil and a lie. Therefore, the destruction of the life of the body is a blessing and we should desire it. Schopenhauer says, life is that which should not be, it's an evil, and the passage into nothingness is the only good in life. Solomon says, all that is in the world, folly and wisdom and riches and poverty and mirth and grief, is vanity and emptiness. Man dies and nothing is left of him. And that is stupid. Buddha says, to live in the consciousness of the inevitability of suffering, of becoming enfeebled, of old age and of death is impossible. We must free ourselves from life, from all possible life. So all of them are encouraging you in a way to renounce life itself. That's, at least for this narrator, it was very discouraging. And he couldn't find his answers there either. So what did he do next? And where did he find his answers? That part we'll cover in the next episode. And I hope you'll stay tuned, because that's going to be quite interesting. He presents a beautiful picture of what it means to have faith, and what is the faith of the ordinary people, how is it different from that of the intellectuals, and he provides a wonderful lessons on theology. So with that, I will come back in the next episode And we'll conclude the discussion on this book called A Confession by Leo Tolstoy. Thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you the next time. Thank you.